Well, welcome to the return of the Colosseum. My name is Roger Bolton, and I'm the host for this debate. In Rome, gladiatorial combat and orgies were the mainstay of entertainment, while in the modern era, public entertainment was cleansed in favour of music, sport, theatre, and so forth. The lure of the internet's salacious content is stronger than ever. Where is this new uncharted space taking our entertainment and our morality? With us are Meg Rosoff. She's a renowned author with multiple accolades to her name, including the Carnegie Medal and the Astrid Lindgren Memorial Award. Soma Ghosh is a cultural critic, performer, and the founding editor of cult polysexual magazine, The Demented Goddess. And Joanna Kavenna is a novelist. Her first novel, Inglorious, won the Orange Prize for New Writing. Her latest novel, Zed, is an absurdist depiction of life. So we're going to start by asking each of these three to outline briefly their position on the questions of, should we see a return to the explicit desires of the ancients as a deeply troubling challenge to our culture? Meg Rosoff.
Right, well, 108 million people were killed by wars in the 20th century. And it's estimated that up to 1 billion people have been killed in wars throughout human history. War, it could be argued, is the most extreme expression of the worst of human impulses. But there is no shortage. It starts when you're a child. It starts with playground bullying. If you're not very lucky, it goes on to workplace bullying. In between, there's all sorts of stuff like the rape and sexual exploitation of children. There's coercive control in relationships. And of course, on a larger scale, there are things like religious persecution, genocide, the pogroms, and one of our favorites, of course, in history, the Inquisition. There's murder and torture and criminal acts. And more recently, there have been the violent pile-on trolling events that occur on social media sites. They're nothing if not wide-ranging, and they include subjects like YA literature, politics, knitting apparently got very involved with trolling recently, pretty much any subject that you can possibly name. Mary Beard was viciously violently trolled for daring to suggest, and of course she is a historian, that the Romans were of mixed ethnicity. So it seems to me that bad, and when I say bad, I mean lethal, sadistic, vicious, irrational, and cruel behavior is, for whatever reason, intrinsic to the makeup of the human brain. Humans are, of course, capable of great acts of kindness, intelligence, and positive social action, given the chance. However, we know from history and from our own experience in primary school that it's best not to encourage human beings to express themselves anonymously from a place of ignorance or frustration, or in a forum that allows or plays on the othering of our fellow human beings, in which case I would probably somewhat controversially suggest that we shut down Twitter.
Right. Well, Soma Ghosh, do you see or would you see a return to the explicit desires of the ancients as a deeply troubling challenge to our culture?
Well, there's good explicit and there's bad explicit in the age we're living in today, which you might regard as the age of spectacle, but really began a long time ago. Certainly the Romans are an example. In the Roman example, we have imperialism, and we have an empire that through spectacle is seeking to terrorize, subjugate, and distract in order to impose order. Interestingly, what I see happening now in the modern desire for display and the displayed life is some choices whereby spectacle can be performer-led. And in that way, I would say making what is considered to be bad explicit or displayed in a way that you are controlling can actually deconstruct sensationalism and use it to highlight invisible pain and invisible injustice. And an example I'd give there would be Liad Kantarowicz, the so-called terrorist pussy superstar, who is an Israeli who willingly became a migrant and who takes to the streets using porn acts to protest against Israeli censorship and to protest against the plight of the Palestinians. So, from my point of view, I see repression as a way of, in fact, monsterizing the monstrous. So, when we say that something is bad, we begin to give it a particular importance, a particular shape, and we also perform outrage. And these mechanics are used by the modern politics of spectacle through Twitter, through tabloids, through clickbait, to crush justice and create mob rule. But interestingly, they then return us on the one hand to, you might think, this ancient world of spectacle, but at the same time, if we move to repress what is being said, we're actually partaking in a politics of sensationalism. So for me, bad explicit and good explicit are interlinked in this age, and it's up to us to develop some kind of agency within the modern age of spectacle.
Joanna, are you similarly, not similarly actually, are you disturbed by what you now see and fear a return to the Colosseum?
Well, I want to look at this metaphor we're using, the Colosseum, because I think when we talk about is it a return to the ancients, I think we have the dilemma that the ancient world presents. And if you look at the earlier form of spectacle than the Colosseum, it's Greek tragedy. That's the great spectacle for the Greeks. And Greek tragedy, as Aristotle writes, it works through mimesis. That's the whole point of the tragedy, is that it's an imitation of real horror, real suffering, real violence, real death. And you lead the audience into compassion and then into catharsis, that idea that you go through a kind of ritual and there's a kind of purification at the end. With the Colosseum, it's a really important leap or descent, I'd argue, into literalism. You lose this notion of metaphor and poetry and mimesis. You think that the representation and the thing you're representing have to be the same. So when you represent violence, horror, suffering and death, you demand that your so-called performers are really maimed, they're really tortured, they're really killed. And that completely alters the audience relationship. Whereas in that kind of great mimetic tradition of tragedy, the audience is moved to compassion for suffering. If you're watching the Colosseum spectacle and our contemporary iterations of it, you'll move to cruelty, as Meg mentioned. It's a huge explosion of cruelty. There's no catharsis because you're kind of mired in the darkness. You don't emerge from the darkness into this kind of light that is that human experience. And so you're left in this kind of debauchery. And as Soma was saying, it's also very much about imperialism and about power. It has that Caligula notion to it as well, that the pleasure of those who can control the revels, who decide what's on the stage, is seen to be greater in importance than the suffering and even death of those who are powerless, who have to be performers. You know, the gladiators were, compelled into these acts. So I think that's a really important distinction. And if we're vaulting 2 millennia from that kind of ancient world into the internet, what we have really is the internet isn't just one Colosseum, it isn't just one amphitheatre, one drama. There's an infinite array. The whole mirror's been shattered. And you can have any number of Colosseums or theatres and any number of audiences and any number of little mini emperors determining the revels. And so there's an infinite array of possibility. But I think there's a further question and a further challenge, which is about fake and real. If you're talking about representation and reality and the difference between them, the internet messes with that in such a kind of unusual historical way, in that if you're sitting in the Colosseum and you're splattered with gore, you see this poor gladiator dying, breathing his last, you know that that's real. With the internet, you don't know what's real. You have a problem with, are the revels real? Are they fake? And I wonder if the response to that is a further distrusting of representation in a way, a further kind of quest for literal fact, for everything to be verifiable, and a further dismissing of that grand old poetic tradition where you represent. So that would be mine. I want the theatre, not the Colosseum, and I want catharsis and compassion, not cruelty. But I feel, that's also a question about whether you want art or sort of lumpen literalism as well, whether you want to have play or whether you want to have horror.
To continue watching this video, click the link in the top left or in the description below. Or visit iai.tv for more debates and talks from the world's leading thinkers on today's biggest ideas.